Kidnapping of 200 Chibok girls in northern Nigeria brought about an international outcry. 21 of them were freed in November 2016. But what has been the reaction of the international community so far, especially the flight of Christians in northern Nigeria? I'm here in the Houses of Parliament to interview a member of the House of Lords, Baroness COX. She's a crossbench peer. She specializes in religious liberty, humanitarian issues, humanitarian aid, and human rights issues. I am Wilma Izimako, your host on Talking Politics. Stay tuned. Baroness COX of Queensbury specializes in international affairs, human rights and humanitarian aid issues for Her Majesty's government. World areas she currently focuses on are Armenia, South Sudan and Sudan, Burma, Nigeria, North Korea, amongst others. For over 30 years, she regularly traveled to the northern states in Nigeria on a fact-finding mission about the flight of Christians in northern Nigeria. This interview highlights her mission and conclusions. Lady Cox, it's lovely to have you on Talking Politics.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be with you.
Thank you. A few years ago, there was the capture of 200 Chibok girls in northern Nigeria by the Islamist group Boko Haram, and that brought about an international outcry. You have been going to Nigeria before that, and you went on a fact-finding mission to Nigeria recently. Let's talk about the reaction of the international community to the crisis in northern Nigeria. And you came up with a report called The Terror of Insurgency in northern Nigeria and the Flight of Christians in northern Nigeria. Are you happy with the reaction of the international community?
Well, I've had the privilege of going to Nigeria, northern Nigeria, and Plateau State in Central Belt for many, many years, probably nearly 2 decades. So I've seen a lot of the tragedies that have been occurring up there in northern Nigeria, in Plateau State, in Jos. I've seen many of the attacks on Christians, or the results of the attacks on Christians. I've seen the destroyed churches. I've seen the devastated communities. We've been with the people as they suffer the results very much of the imposition of Sharia law up in the northern states. So there's a whole lot of issues up there which haven't been covered by the international media. And I've always been very concerned because the kind of issues that are happening up there are of enormous significance. Similar events do get covered in other parts of the world, but I'll just highlight 3 perhaps aspects of what's been happening in northern Nigeria since I've been going. I mean, first of all, when Sharia law was imposed in the 12 states in the north, that led to a lot of discrimination against Christians. Christians have real difficulty getting education, or at least the Christian or the non-Islamic education. They have real difficulty getting healthcare. They have real difficulty getting work and jobs. There's discrimination. Real difficulty getting permission to build a church or restore a church that's been destroyed. So many Christians have actually fled from the northern states. Many have gone to other parts of Nigeria where they can live safely, where they can practice their religion without problems. So that's been going on for a long time. Then, of course, the situation got much worse when Boko Haram arrived with its Islamist agenda and a very aggressive agenda, determined to try to get rid of all Christians from northern Nigeria. And that involved a lot of attacks, a lot of killings, a lot of abductions. And you mentioned the Chibok girls. That, of course, was a horrendous tragedy. But they weren't the only girls who'd been taken. Many hundreds of women and girls have been abducted before the Chibok tragedy, many hundreds afterwards. But we don't hear about those. And if you go to northern Nigeria, many people will say, well, we are glad in a way that at least the tragedy of the suffering of the girls at Chibok was reported, but we're also very angry because no one knows about the women and girls taken from our communities before Chibok or after Chibok. So that has been a continuing real violation of human rights, a source of great tragedy. And then more recently, when we were here this year, we found another development which is of great concern, and that is that for time immemorial, there's a group of people, well indeed a race of people called the Fulani, and they're traditional herdsmen, cattle farmers, and they take their huge herds of cattle across land in the dry season to find more places where they can graze. That's been going on from time immemorial. And there's often a little bit of conflict, a bit of tension, obviously, if cattle are going through your land, but it's never led to outright war. But more recently, there's been a very serious development whereby many of these Fulani are now well armed, and they've been attacking Christian villages, they've been killing people, driving them off their land, destroying their homes, their properties, and taking over and settling there with their cattle. So that is another form of religious cleansing. So these are some of the trends which I witnessed at first hand over the years.
So this problem has been there just before the capture of the Chibok girls by Boko Haram. So Boko Haram made it more prevalent. That's what has happened.
Boko Haram, they escalated the violence and the aggression. They were well armed, they were militarily very powerful, and they would destroy whole communities, and they spread far and fast through many parts of northern Nigeria. More recently, the Nigerian government, the Nigerian army, has driven some of them back. So some areas which they did occupy have now been restored to their communities, but there's still a lot of violence going on. When I was there in Nigeria, just at the end of last year, there were 40 people killed in Kaduna, 40 Christians killed in Kaduna. That never hit the headlines. You get 40 people killed in some other countries, that will hit the headlines. But that kind of tragedy, that kind of attack against communities has been going on for so long and is still continuing. And it is something the world needs to know about.
Let's talk about the Fulani herdsmen. You mentioned that they are heavily armed, and these are meant to be nomadic herdsmen with cattle. So how do you think that development came about?
Well, we can only speculate how that development came about, that the Fulani herdsmen have changed their policy and have also become much more equipped to carry out very violent attacks. We were told, as I say, they're heavily armed now, they seem to be well trained, and we visited 4 villages which had been attacked by the Fulani herdsmen, and it was just piles of rubble where their homes had been. Most people have had to flee for their lives. Just a handful of people remain, with a very brave pastor who is looking after them. But the whole area around, you see the Fulani cattle, it's going to be very hard for those communities to return back to their homes because it's occupied. They've been driven out. So these are very serious developments. And again, I think the Nigerian government ought to be called to account. Every government has a duty to protect its own civilians, whatever their religion. But these attacks on Christians have been going on, as I've said, for a long time. And I think there's been a very inadequate response by the government to protect all its people.
Your report is the culmination of your fact-finding mission and real interviews of those that have been directly affected by the conflict. Tell us some of the testimonies you witnessed firsthand.
There are heartbreaking stories of people who suffered at the hands of Boko Haram. Many of them are still living as displaced people in places like Plateau State. There are camps for those displaced people there, and we visit those displaced people, and many children tell us the horrendous stories of where they may be seen their parents, their relatives beheaded, and their heads placed on top of the bodies of their loved ones, the way villages may be attacked and families burnt alive in their homes, the way they've had to flee for their lives with food and suffered horrifically as people fleeing for their lives. And now they're living in very difficult situations in the camps for displaced people. They want to go home. Everyone wants to go back to their home. But if you try to go back up to northeastern Nigeria, up to Borno, to Maiduguri, it's almost impossible for many reasons. One is that their homes have been devastated. There may be mines around, and Boko Haram may still be around. So there's nothing to go back to in the way of having a livelihood, of being able to survive. And it's dangerous with mines and with constant fear of terrorist attacks. So many are not able yet to go home. the very brave Archbishop Benjamin Quashie of the Diocese of Jos in Plateau State has just been up to Maiduguri, and I met him, and he just recently, he was in London, and he told us how very, very difficult, dangerous, tough it is up still in that part of northeastern Nigeria, how hard it's going to be for people to return to their homes. So you've got this tragedy, you've got displacement, and you've got just very real continuing problems from Boko Haram in some areas, from the Fulani in other areas.
From your observation, this insurgency is actually spreading throughout Nigeria. From the northern part of Nigeria, we hear of reports of it going on in Benue State, in Enugu State, and we can see the Fulani headsmen, not certain if some of them are Boko Haram people, carrying out these attacks on the locals and the indigenes of this land. What do you think is fueling this insurgency across the country?
Well, when we look at the people who've been undertaking the terrorist attacks most recently, I mean, they are very clear that they have an Islamist ideology. Boko Haram, they hate Western education, but they've also said they want to get rid of all Christians out of northern Nigeria. So it is very much an ideology that is motivating them, and that ideology seems to have very close links with the other Islamist ideologies, creating such horrendous persecution and oppression across a whole sort of swathe of the Middle East into Africa. There are a lot of similarities with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, with Al-Shabaab. Sudan has a president and a government which is very much an Islamist government that is carrying out its own genocide of its own people in Darfur, in the Nuba Mountains, in Blue Nile. When we go to Nigeria, they say there's a lot of support coming in from Sudan to Boko Haram, to the terrorist activities. So it seems part of a bigger ideological development of hardline Islamist brutality and terrorism. And many, in that context, I must emphasize that many of the peaceable Muslims also do suffer, and many of them have suffered certainly at the hands of Boko Haram, many of them suffer in Syria. So it's not all of Islam, it is the hardline Islamist ideology, as I say, which underpins ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. But that is very serious and deeply disturbing.
When you talk of Sudan, do you think some of the people carrying out these attacks in Nigeria are not Nigerians themselves? They could be mercenaries from other countries that are supporting Boko Haram.
We certainly hear reports from very responsible people that there are a lot of mercenaries involved in these attacks. We were told that Sudan certainly helped to support the establishment of Boko Haram and the growth of Boko Haram in northern Nigeria. And we also hear stories of mercenaries coming in from other neighbouring countries. So it is part of a bigger picture, which also makes it all the more worrying, but also all the more important to address it, to talk about it, so that we can think of ways in which to move forward and to try to stop this killing, this persecution, and to try to encourage the government of Nigeria to fulfill its responsibility to protect all its people.
What has the international community done about this crisis and insurgency so far? I mean, we have similar things that happened in Iraq, and we saw the reaction of the international community towards Iraq. What about northern Nigeria?
Well, certainly if you visit northern Nigeria, you will find a lot of places that are not being reached by international aid. The British government says it's putting a lot of money into northern Nigeria, into these areas. Well, so I'm pleased they are, but certainly where we are, we don't see where that money is going. I'm thinking of the camps that we visited for the displaced people in Plateau State, and their needs are desperate. Many have also had to flee, and they're living dispersed in communities, and again, aid doesn't reach them. I have a very small little charitable organisation, Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust, and we do go and we meet the people. We always ask local people, what is your priority? Where are your people most at need? And the kind of answers we get show us that people at great need where the big international aid organisations' money is not reaching them. We also try and promote some reconciliation programmes. For example, in Bauchi State, there's a place called Naningi, and we're very happy to support a school there which helps to bring together Muslims and Christians in a good educational system. The teachers are both Muslim and Christian. The students are Muslim and Christian, actually more Muslims than Christians. We gave them money for a borehole, we didn't have any water there. But reconciliation is enormously important. We also support reconciliation programs in Jos, where the Christians are reaching out, particularly women to Muslim women, and in building friendships, enabling the Muslim women to learn how to maybe have some empowerment. They do the most beautiful beadwork, and that gives them dignity and self-esteem. But it's so important for healing fractured communities where people have been torn apart by the violence in previous years, from the Sharia-induced or Sharia-accompanied violence to Boko Haram, to the Fulani, and especially for young people. Because if young people are unemployed, don't go to school, marginalised, disaffected, they will be very vulnerable to radicalisation and to recruitment by Boko Haram and other terrorist groups. So these sort of initiatives that I would like to see again, some international aid helping, because this is building the future for Nigeria, healing the fractures between the communities of the past and trying to build the happy relationships that are so much needed for the future of Nigeria.
We'll come back to talk about international aid, but let's look at some statistics here. About 5 million people so far have been affected by the crisis in northern Nigeria, and the UK government has pumped in £39 million towards the reconciliation programme. The reconciliation programme, has it been very effective?
Well, I don't know, I haven't seen their reconciliation programme at work, but certainly we see a lot of need for a lot more reconciliation. And certainly the very good programmes that we support have not received British government money, and I wish they would, because I've seen them at first hand. They are superb. They are right at the community level.
At a grassroots level.
At the really grassroots level. When we go and we walk across the street and we talk to the people from both communities, and where we go to where they meet together. And I wish everyone could see just the hope and the joy on the faces of those women involved in this friendship and this empowerment. And the real friendship, the real love that's there between them. I don't know about the official programmes, but I know this grassroots programmes desperately need help, and they're doing good work. And I wish some of the money would reach them, as I wish some of the money would reach many of the displaced people whom we meet, who so far have not received the help they need.
You've been going to Nigeria for almost 3 decades, so you have a lot of experience within the indigenes of the country and the locals there at the grassroots level. How best do you think international aid can actually reach them?
Well, I have always a certain concern for the way in which much international aid only works through big aid organisations. And those big aid organisations don't always get to where the needs are greatest. Staff may be risk averse, it may be too dangerous, or there may be other reasons. My fundamental philosophy in the whole aid context is you go and meet the local people, you find local partners, indigenous people, who really know their own people. You ask them their priorities, you respect their priorities, you give them that dignity, and they will do wonderful things with the aid that we give them. We have wonderful partners in Jos, for example, Archbishop Benjamin Kwashi and his reconciliation programs, the Christian Institute, providing education in maternal and child health and ministry and so on. In Bauchi, the wonderful Bishop of Bauchi, but they reach out to their people. They really are aware that people are in need. They are on the ground, and they're very accountable. They're very responsible people, but they reach those in need. And certainly where we've been, so many of those people in need have not been reached by the major aid organisations. So my philosophy is go and work with the local people, through the local people, for the local people, and then give them that dignity of helping their people and celebrating the good things they do. The tragedy is there, but you've also got to affirm the churches particularly have a lot of respect among the local people and are wonderful at reaching out to those most in need.
Let's talk about the media in Nigeria. When you were there, what was your observation about the reporting in the media, especially the BBC Hausa service?
Well, I wish I could report something, because we don't see very much of it at all. As I say, when we were there last time, when we were actually there in Kaduna, there were 40 people massacred. Do you think that ever got out? When we were there previously, we were there when there was a terrible outbreak of violence in Jos, and many people were killed, Christians predominantly. you know, it doesn't get out. And some of it, I think, was actually quite distorted. We were told, for example, and I'm reporting now what I didn't see, but I trust those people who told me, that in some of the violence, there is quite often a distorted representation. For example, after some of the killings in one of the outbreaks of violence in Jos, so we were told, the local Muslims who'd actually started the violence took many of the bodies, the Christians, and put them in the mosque, and then said that around the world as if it was obviously the Muslims who were being killed. So I think we need much more rigorous, much more honest, much more, I think, shall I say, accountable media reporting for people really to understand what's happening up in northern Nigeria. It's so important for the people, so important for justice, it's so important for pressure to be put on to those people who can make a difference, that they will make a difference. Because it really is, in human terms, horrendous tragedy. Martyred by the 200 or so girls from Chibok by hundreds and hundreds, and think of all the families who've lost daughters or wives. When we were in Bauchi, 4 Christian women were taken one day when we were there. It's going on, been going on. The magnitude of that suffering. So in human terms, it needs to be told. In terms of accountability for aid, that needs to be told. In terms of a government response to protect all its civilians, that needs to be told. But also Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, and also potentially such a prosperous nation, for the sake of Nigeria, for the sake even, because Nigeria could, if it goes on in this way, its own political future could become very unstable. And some people even talk about, if it goes on like this, maybe even the breakup of Nigeria. And this would have serious implications for the people of Nigeria, also for West Africa. So they're important issues in human terms, in Christian terms, or religious terms, and in terms of the bigger political agenda.
Coming back to the international community, especially Her Majesty's government, what do you think the international community can do, or the measures that can be employed to ensure that this insurgency is curtailed?
Well, insurgency is insurgency and requires appropriate response. Again, there have been quite a few reports, which I've heard from reliable people, where Christians have been attacked and authorities have not intervened to protect them, particularly in the northern states. So there needs to be full accountability, for people who should be maintaining law and order, respecting human rights, whether it's at local level or up to state level or to government level. That should be implemented, and there's been, I think, very clearly many cases where there's been a real problem with that. But also, in a more general level, the discrimination against Christians in terms of, say, access to education, permission to build churches or rebuild churches have been destroyed. There is a lot that needs to be done in terms of ensuring that federal law, national law, takes precedence over Sharia law, and Sharia law does not take precedence over national law. And at the moment there are problems on those issues.
Thank you very much, Baroness. Is there anything else you want people to know?
I would just like to pay my great respect to the dignity and the courage, the resourcefulness and the resilience of the peoples whom we've met in Nigeria. And we haven't done much work in the south, but in Central Belt and in the northern states. Such courage. And it always amazes and humbles me how people still keep that wonderful Nigerian smile, and how when they worship, when the Christians worship, they worship with such joy, much more joy than in many a comfortable church in the West. That tremendous spirit of dignity, of faith, of courage, and of generosity and hospitality. People who often have virtually nothing will give you what they have. You never know the sacrifice by what they give you. So it's a privilege to be alongside our brothers and sisters in Nigeria, and I'm glad to have said a little bit about their story.
Thank you, Lady Cox. Thank you.
Thank you.
Viewers, this is Talking Politics, and today we've been interviewing Lady Cox, and she is a member of the House of Lords, and she specialises in religious liberty, humanitarian aid and human rights issues. We have been focusing on the insurgency in northern Nigeria and the flight of Christians in northern Nigeria. If you have any questions, you can send emails to info@loveworldtv.co.uk. Enjoy the rest of our programs.